Hey folks, happy Friday. The end of 2 Samuel in chapter 24 gives us a picture of both the triumph and the tragedy of David's kingdom. I mean, it begins with God being angry with the people and inciting the heart of David against them to conduct a census. Now, it's kind of strange because we don't really know why God was angry with the people, and there was nothing inherently wrong with conducting a census. You just sort of get the feeling that something's not right. So David commissions his contentious general Joab to conduct the census. And Joab also gets the sense that something's not right. He says, may the Lord multiply your troops 100-fold, but let's not do this. Joab understands that David is amassing to himself troops, and he's trusting in the power of his own might and not in the power of God. But the will of David prevails over Joab and his other generals, and the census moves forward. It takes Joab over 9 months to conduct the census, and when he returns, he reports to David there are 1.3 million men who can fight. Now, as soon as David hears that number, he's convicted in his heart that he sinned, and in fact, he knew he'd been sinning all along. And he cries out to God, I've sinned greatly, remove this guilt from me. So the prophet Gad comes to David the next day and says, well, you have three choices. You can have 3 years of famine, 3 months of war, or 3 days of plague. Now, David's had war for decades, and he's been through a famine, and so he opts to remain in the hands of a merciful God and chooses 3 days of plague. So God sends plague to the land through an angel, and 70,000 people die. And just as the angel of the Lord is preparing to descend on Jerusalem, David intervenes and he cries out. He says, I'm the shepherd. I'm the one who sinned. Don't bring this to the sheep. Don't punish the sheep. Put this on me and on my family. And so the Lord relents, and the plague is stopped. Now, right where the plague has stopped is on a threshing floor, which would be a raised mound of land that was used for agricultural purposes. And David wants to buy that land to conduct sacrifices on it. And it's owned by a man named Araunah, who says, well, just take it. And David says, no, if it doesn't cost me anything, my sacrifice will be meaningless. So he buys the land and he conducts the sacrifices, and peace is restored to Israel. Now, this story, like so many stories of David, is filled with David's failure and the people that died because of it. And it's very much about, as all of 1 and 2 Samuel is about, who has the right to rule in Israel? What kind of nation was Israel to be? What kind of king was to rule over it? The nation was to be a righteous nation with a righteous king, but in the end, neither David nor the nation was any different than the surrounding nations and kings. And David is presented as the best that mankind has to offer, and yet falls far short of the Messiah that God's people needs. But the end of the book gives us this really gentle whisper of hope, because on that field that David had purchased, Solomon, David's son, would build the great temple that would be the place where the power and the presence of God was known among his people. And it would be so for centuries afterwards, until in fact Jesus replaced that temple with not just another religious system, but with the people of God, because through his death, his resurrection, and the giving of his Spirit, we become the temple of God. God's power and God's presence is known through you and through me. And this story also reminds me that there's always going to be death and pain in our world, isn't there? But in the midst of all of the chaos, in the midst of all of the pain, there's always this whisper of hope if we listen to it. So let's listen to God's whisper of hope and See if we can bring some courage and faith into our world. Hey, y'all, thanks for listening. If this has encouraged you, give it a like and a share. And as always, get out there and make the world a better place because you're in it. I'll talk to y'all again soon.